Hello, I'm Dawn Durham, and welcome to PaTTANpod. Our emotions and relationships impact how and what we learn. Emotions allow us to be an active learner and sustain our engagement. On the flip side, unmanaged stress and poor regulation can certainly lead to problems with attention, memory, and can contribute to behaviors that are disruptive to our learning. Joining us today to help share what we can do in our classrooms to help our students with the social emotional learning piece is Kelly Perales, a licensed clinical social worker and leader in mental health integration and PBIS. Thanks, Kelly, for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Let's first talk about social emotional learning, or SEL, as we sometimes hear it called. Mm-hmm. I want to start by thinking about and really defining what is social emotional learning and why are we talking about it so much in our field right now?
Sure. Really, social emotional learning is those prosocial skills, emotional regulation and management, coping skills, and problem-solving skills. And we are learning that sometimes when we see inappropriate behavior in the classroom, or more and more children who have experienced adverse childhood experiences, that we need to be very deliberate and explicit in teaching these types of skills to students directly.
So when we say we need to be deliberate and explicit in teaching these skills, what does that teaching look like? How do we go about teaching problem-solving skills? How do we teach students about coping mechanisms and how to regulate their emotions? How does someone do that in the classroom?
Sure. Well, first of all, there are curriculum that are available, and so some of them are free, some of them there's a cost to it. We really endorse from our National Technical Assistance Center on Positive Behavior Intervention and Supports that the teaching is tied to the multi-tiered system of support and those other behavioral expectations. So that is to say, we discourage having social emotional learning or a curriculum that's maybe taught on Tuesday and perhaps behavior expectations or PBIS cool tools that are taught on Wednesday. We really want schools and districts to integrate and align those types of initiatives and that teaching and really embed, for example, if a school has a teaching matrix, those skills into it so that they can be modeled and practiced and put into the setting within the school that seems appropriate.
So we're not really talking about an isolation piece. We're not talking about teaching students, as you said, on Tuesday from 8:30 to 9:15. We're doing this, and that's our sole focus for this time. But it's really embedded and integrated into, I hear you say, multi-tiered systems of support. So we're talking about tier 1 and core instruction. Everybody's receiving instruction on how to regulate emotions, on how to gain coping mechanisms and coping strategies. But perhaps, as I hear you saying, perhaps there's a group of students that may need a tier 2 intervention in this, maybe a little bit more help in a tier 3 intervention. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and this is why it's really important, as we do with other MTSs lenses, whether it's reading, math, behavior, is look at the data and use that data for deciding what skills need to be taught, how frequently, and the intensity and duration as you're indicating. So for example, a lot of times school cafeterias are overwhelming, they're loud. I sometimes say they're kind of stinky, to be honest, right? That can be a time where we especially need to focus on helping kids navigate and cope with that setting. And so if we explicitly teach all kids what that looks like and sounds like, then we can sort of say, do we have a small set of kids who need something more? And maybe that's a quieter place to eat where there's less students, and perhaps someone can be with them and even remind them of the things they're supposed to do, practice breathing, ask for help, things like that.
So when we think about that, you said it has to be data-driven, which we know all good instruction should be in the classroom setting, no matter what field you're looking at, no matter what grade level you're looking at. And you had said, something like the cafeteria. Are we talking data that is collected just through observations and anecdotal notes, or what kind of data should we collect to identify where in the school day we might need some assistance or what students may need some assistance with social emotional learning.
Right. Great point. So first of all, something we've learned over the years with PBIS is that we need to look well beyond those acting out behaviors that end up sent to the office for discipline problems. So we're starting to recognize, and we know this through the literature, that the prevalence of things like anxiety, depression, kids who've experienced trauma, really is equal to physical health type illnesses in children, asthma, diabetes, etc. And so we're talking about what we refer to as internalizing concerns. And so these aren't necessarily going to show up in acting out behavior. Sometimes they do. Sometimes kids are suffering in silence. And so we have to move beyond some of the typical data sets we look at, office discipline referrals, grades, attendance. Sometimes attendance could be an indicator if kids aren't showing up of perhaps an internalizing issue. We also need to start looking at who are kids who show up down in the nurse's office and it's not to take a daily medication. Maybe they have stomach aches, headaches, other somatic complaints. What about observations, as you mentioned, kids who may be withdrawn, isolating themselves, even crying? What information can we gather about what happens for kids outside of school to understand their home and community environments and what impact that may be having? What we know from the literature on trauma is that there are many children in our classroom who have had those adverse childhood experiences, and we need to better inform and equip ourselves, kind of going in with the assumption that all kids really need to have some level of skill development around these types of social emotional learning competencies.
So I want to address two things you had talked about there. The first one being that when we look at data or how we're determining what skills are needed and who may need those skills, we're really not. We are saying absolutely look at office referrals. Look at grades, look at attendance, course performance, all of those things. But in addition, you need to be thinking about those other more silent students, nurse referrals. Observations from the classroom teachers were saying, hey, so-and-so rarely talks in the classroom, rarely answers questions, or so-and-so seems, to be unhappy frequently lately and is really withdrawn from their peer, from their groups. So we're really looking at multiple pieces of data, not just our traditional data sets. But then you also talked about how the benefit, and this goes right back to that multi-tiered system of support, MTSs, you talked about all students benefit from instruction and on these skills of how to be regulated and how to maintain your engagement and how to maintain your active learning in the classroom. So that really addresses that core tier 1 instruction.
Absolutely, and a couple of things there too. Another data point is the use of universal screening, and that again is for both those externalizing and internalizing concerns. Now that's only one data point, and I wouldn't say use that in isolation, but it can help uncover other kids who heretofore we might not have recognized maybe were at risk or had a need. And so that, again, is another element of the core features of multi-tiered system of support. And certainly if schools are able to use a universal screener, that's going to be another piece of data to help them. The other thing that you mentioned is that, yes, we want this to be a universal. These are competencies that all students and all adults, frankly, need some, learning around. Also, that data helps us identify, are there other things we should be doing for all kids? And or what do we need to put into our continuum at tiers 2 and 3 to have that, full range of what interventions are going to match the need. And so in some schools, there may be, a handful or a dozen kids who need some intensive intervention or targeted intervention. In another school, again, based on school community data, there might be an intervention that needs to be dropped down to tier 1 for all.
Because there's a need for so many, then we need to look at core instruction.
Yeah, if it's more than 20%, we should be doing it for all kids.
Okay. You know, as you're talking, and we're going back to universal screeners, and we're going back to core instruction, tier 2, tier 3, MTSs, there's such a big connection and an integration between social emotional learning, behavior, and academics. And I think oftentimes, and as you're talking, I'm thinking about this, we isolate the two. We divide out that MTSS triangle. We keep reading and math over here, and we put behavior and social emotional learning over there. But with you saying something like a universal screener is a great tool to first identify who may need something, not the only identifier, but who may need something, that's no different than when we look at a universal screener in literacy or in math.
That's right.
We just determine who may need something, and then we figure out what they need and how we're going to give it to them.
Exactly.
So that conversation, I mean, it's just such a crucial piece for our school teams to be thinking about is what I do in literacy and math, I do for behavior and social emotional learning. There's no difference there.
That's exactly right. And that is why it's important that it's the teacher who's providing that direct instruction.
Okay.
And not someone else coming into the classroom to deliver the lesson. Again, there's not that transference and generalization. For kids, especially at the elementary level, they know everything I learn is from my teacher. And so it's really crucial that our teachers are the ones delivering the content, modeling those skills, practicing, prompting, and then again, we can link and layer on other skills and interventions as we see the need.
So when you think, you're saying that the classroom teacher really is the most ideal individual to be providing this instruction for all students. And when you think about that and the work you do with schools, I'm sure one of the questions you get is, when would you like me to do that, right?
That's right.
Because that's a question we get that too in all other areas of the educational world is, when would you like me to do that? But I guess what I'd like to point out is that, you know, if these are skills that are necessary for all of our students, for them now as their students, but also into adulthood, for them to have gainful employment, for them to continue on with a higher education if they so choose, or into the workforce, into a trade skill, or what have you, into the service. These are skills they need to have, then it's worth us spending a little bit of time every day with these kids to make sure that they have these skills.
That's exactly right. And you know, look at where we're headed right now. 21st century skills, or college and career ready, call it whatever. In different states it's called different things.
Sure.
But you know, what we're hearing is, we've asked employers, and they need people who are, able to solve problems, able to make decisions, able to have empathy, and relate to others, accept and receive feedback. These are the things that if we start young, we're going to be able to instill in our students. And so you're right, that, you know, teachers, I understand, they are tasked with a lot, not only around academics, but frankly, they have to be paying attention to physical health issues, as I mentioned, and other challenges in the classroom. We have to find the natural places where it fits in. You know, at the secondary level, sometimes that's in health class, or while teaching other skills like study skills, organizational skills. You know, and at the elementary level, already teachers are spending some time on either teaching behavior expectations or managing behavior. Teaching these types of skills or managing the fallout if we're not. Kids who are not able to regulate their emotions or you know, relate to their peers and things like that. And so what we're finding is the more proactive we can be, that's time gained back to focus on instruction and other things in the classroom.
So front loading certainly has its impact and has a positive effect, because then you can spend more time providing instruction because you're not dealing with the behavior or the misbehaviors or conduct that is not going to be helpful for the classroom in the learning process. I want to pivot for a little minute. We've been talking a lot about, you know, why social emotional learning is important and how it kind of embeds and integrates into the academic system. But I'm hoping you can identify for us, what does a student who is socially and emotionally competent look like and sound like in a classroom? How do I know I've got a kid in front of me here who can regulate behaviors? What does this all look like?
Sure. It very much matches to kind of back to the definition. So these are kids who understand their feelings and know how to manage them. They understand what empathy is and know how to show it to others. They can make decisions on their own, solve simple problems without needing to turn to an adult to fix it for them, if you will. These are kids who have those prosocial skills. They can establish and maintain relationships with peers and also with adults. So it's putting the kind of definition, that piece about prosocial skills, emotional regulation and management, into action. And that's what we see for those kids who have mastered, so to speak, those skills. Now, we're human, so we're probably going to be able to do this hopefully about 80% of the time. We're all still going to, we're going to have feelings, we're going to cry, we're going to have situations where we're frustrated, especially when maybe learning new things in school. But that's the time then that the teacher can use that language to be supportive, to be empathetic themselves, and to help resolve the issue.
So, and you led right into my next group of questions here is, what can the teacher in the classroom do to promote social or solid social emotional students? What can they do? And I hear you saying things like modeling and using good language and bringing back the skills that were taught into the conversations in the classroom. But what else can a teacher be doing to ensure that we're promoting social health, positive social health?
Yeah, so first of all, and especially if I feel like I can't not say, if we're implementing positive behavior intervention and supports, which we hope everyone is, it sets up a classroom environment that is safe, predictable, consistent, and again, explicitly teaching what we expect from students when they come into the room, when they leave the room, during independent work, whatever the context of the classroom. And if the teacher is the one who is teaching those social emotional competencies, again, they're going to have a common language. They're going to be able to, through coaching and professional development that they should receive, recognize and understand if a child might be struggling and how to respond, and frankly, how not to respond. Right? So there are some things that we want to avoid saying or might be contraindicated. Now, again, teachers are adults too. We're gonna, are people too. We're gonna have times when we're also stressed. Before the holidays, I think, is a time for high stress for adults that we just had here, and they've got to kind of check themselves and know, when do I need to reach out for help from my administrator or a peer buddy or whatever, in order to foster that nurturing environment in the classroom.
So as a teacher, I need to take care of myself in addition to monitoring and taking care of my students as well, because I'm a large part of that. I am the leader in that classroom, I am the model in that classroom, and what comes off of me is what's going to feed those kids.
Right.
Absolutely. Right. Now let's flip that into the instructional leaders then. What can an instructional leader in a building or in a district do to promote positive social health for both the staff, the faculty and staff, as well as the students?
Right. Yeah, I spend a lot of time talking about adult wellness and staff wellness. Okay. We know that it's really important that teachers feel supported by their instructional leader, that we are setting up everyone to be successful, that teachers feel confident and competent to be able to move into this realm that maybe they feel like is not their area, right? Okay. I learned to be a third grade teacher or a math teacher or chemistry or whatever. That moving into these other skill sets, they need to feel comfortable with that. Also thinking about their own wellness. And I think, again, on the physical health side, we're getting better at this, or it's easier to talk about, like, schools that do yoga for teachers after school, or what, we're going to do a healthy nutrition thing or whatever. But those coping skills and all of that are important for our adults too. And if we pay attention to that, it can be helpful for them in their own work as well as supporting their students. And the other part is it reduces some of the stigma. I think when we start talking about these social emotional competencies and getting into thinking about mental health, people get uncomfortable about that because of stigma. And I think this really helps us when we can, again, we're focusing on skills, we're focusing on interventions. It takes away some of that mystery perhaps
sure.
about those kinds of things.
I think that's a big piece we often don't recognize is that making it so that talking about social emotional competencies does not come with a stigma attached to it. This is just part of what we do here.
Right.
And in everyday conversation, it's okay to have these conversations or to say we need to address this situation. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. I don't think we often think about that. So I'm pleased to hear you say that. And you had also said quite a bit in regards to the instructional leaders in a school or in a district, how they have to take care of their staff.
Right.
As well as their students, that they need to make sure that they're setting not just the students up for success, but their teachers and their faculty up for success as well.
Yep.
And that comes in a variety of ways of supporting them, of having these conversations, of putting things in place so that they can then go ahead, the teachers can then go ahead and instruct the students in the best manner that they can.
Exactly.
So I think that's a good piece that we have to think not just about the students in our room, but those who are with them every day and instructing them every day, as that's a large piece of what the instruction looks like.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And we want our kids to be self-aware. We want them to be socially, emotionally competent. We want them to problem solve. We want them to be able to work with peers and collaborate, take feedback, give feedback, and you had said in a constructive way. And when we think about all of the skills needed to do that, these are things we can absolutely teach our students, starting from the youngest grades, going all the way up through high school, and then knowing that we're sending them out into the field, into the workforce, and into their homes, prepared as competent adults who can take care of themselves and the ones around them. That's a great, and I'm glad that we were able to have that conversation. And again, I cannot highlight enough that integration and that multi-tiered system of support, MTSs, the integration of academics and the behavior and social emotional learning is just, kids integrate that on their own already.
Yes.
So we really need to be integrating that as well. So that's a great piece. So thank you for that. We think about how we want our teachers to grow professionally. We want to inspire them to say, this may be something I need to learn more about, or this may be a topic that I need to go and pursue more information about. What would you offer to those teachers listening out there, or the instructional leaders out there? How should they go about growing professionally? What would you say to them?
Well, as I mentioned, there are a lot of great resources available out there. Again, some for free, some for cost, in terms of learning more about social emotional competencies. We actually have a technical assistance brief posted at pbis.org that is about teaching social emotional competencies within a PBIS framework, and a lot more detail about what you're mentioning, that piece around alignment and integration. That I think another piece of the stress and pressure on educators is all the initiatives, right? Yeah. And some of them are mandated, and it's sort of trying to figure out how to make all of that happen. And yet, if you look at many of the initiatives that are kind of coming down the line, they all have similar objectives. Again, whether it's suicide prevention, bully prevention, social emotional learning, trauma-informed care, you name it, there are connections, and we need to find the ways to align and integrate and be efficient and effective with the time and resources, as you mentioned.
So pbis.org is definitely a site we want our visitors to go and take a look.
For sure.
We really want them to be thinking about how to implement or how to embed and integrate all of these pieces into each other, as that's where we're going to be efficient and effective for our instruction and for our students.
Yes.
That's a good piece of advice. And again, pbis.org is where we want people to be visiting.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time today. We know that you're so busy doing stuff all around the country to help students and teachers and families learn about social emotional learning. So we appreciate you taking your time out to talk to us here at PaTTANpod. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you to all of you in the field. You truly inspire educational growth in your students every day. A special thank you to John Ragsdale for producing this podcast. We'll see you next time on PaTTANpod.